All right, hello everybody. This is Miss Belvedere, and we are talking about the scientific revolution. Okay, so the scientific revolution is going to be in this video, and it's actually going to be two different parts. So the first part should be about 15 minutes. The second part, we'll see how long it takes, but with this application that I use on my computer, I can only do about 15 minutes at a time. So, talking about the scientific revolution, we're looking here at these two standards that we grade on in class. So remember that these are the standards that when you look at your grade book, that's what it's going to cover, okay? So the scientific revolution is, I think, our third revolution that we're talking about in class, and it has to do a lot with the Renaissance and with the Protestant Reformation happening at the same time. If you guys remember, I mentioned this in class before, that one thing does not follow the other chronologically perfectly, like, oh, the Renaissance is over, now start the Protestant Reformation. But instead, if you guys remember, there's layers. Say that this is the timeline of the Middle Ages, it layers over the timeline of the Renaissance, and then that layers with the timeline of the scientific revolution, okay? So keep in mind that these things, they layer one on top of the other, and there's still that idea of humanism that we talked about with the Renaissance, right? Okay, so if you guys remember this picture here, we looked at this picture. This is by Da Vinci when we talked about the Renaissance, and it has to do a little bit with the changing of the views. So changing views of the universe. Both the Renaissance and the Reformation looked for past models. Humanists turned to ancient classical learning. So remember with the Renaissance, the art that was depicted during that time, it referenced back to the idea of the Romans and the Greeks during the Roman Empire. The same thing takes place with the scientific revolution. They're starting to realize, like, wow, we can actually study this stuff and we can actually research these things, and maybe it might seem like it's going against the church and going against religion to be able to study, like, for example, the human body, but it's actually something that they're starting to strive forward towards, which is understanding the human intellect, whether it's microscopic, whether it's big universal ideas, etc. The Renaissance, the spirit of inquiry, leads scientists to explore beyond the knowledge of the ancients. So before, we talked about how they referenced back to ancient Roman and Greek people. Now the people of the Renaissance, the humanists, the desire to learn more for oneself, now it's striving, okay, what can we do that is above and beyond the Romans and the Greeks, okay? Beginning in the 1500s, profound changes took place in the science that pointed toward a future shaped by a new way of thinking about the physical universe. These new understandings about the physical world became part of what is now called the scientific revolution. So, to give you guys an idea, the Renaissance, okay? The Renaissance that we're talking about, that we talked about before, 1300s to about 1600s, all right? The scientific revolution, we're talking about the 1500s. So right in the middle of that breaking point, okay? Humanism, remember, it's not what church says, but what we discover. So we're kind of stemming off from religion, and we're now identifying what can humans do themselves. Okay, so the old views, there was this guy named Ptolemy. Ptolemy, he's a major player when you're looking at maybe a graphic organizer, if you're organizing the major players or the major people of the scientific revolution. I'm going to be talking about the people that have to do with the scientific revolution, but we have to kind of backtrack a little bit and see who was before. So Ptolemy, he was a scientist that actually talked about the reason of how the Earth is in the middle of our solar system. Wrong, right? Totally wrong. So before we understood that the Earth revolved around the sun, we had the idea that everything revolved around the Earth. So here, in this picture in the back, you can see the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, the Mars. This is what they thought how it was when they rotated around the Earth. But as we all know now in 2020, like, that's totally wrong, right? So his idea was actually ancient, knowing the whole concept of how the Earth is in the middle of this, right? So here comes this guy Copernicus, right? If you guys have ever seen the movie Back to the Future, I know I have some 80s 80s fans in the class, but if you looked at that movie, the dog's name is Copernicus, I think. Well, named after this scientist. So he was a Polish scholar. Oops, let me go back. In the 1500s, he was a Polish scholar, Nicholas Copernicus, and he was actually the first one to prove that the Earth is not in the middle of our solar system, but instead our Earth revolves around the sun, which is what we understand today, right? He proposed a heliocentric or sun-centered model of the universe. Heliocentric meaning the sun is in the middle. The sun, he said, stands at the center of the universe. Earth is just one of several planets that revolve around the sun, okay? So remember, it's a big deal to contradict the church, right? During this time, everybody said, what the church says, I'm going to follow it to the day I die. Here comes this guy saying something that's completely opposite of what the church is teaching. And so it's kind of like, whoa, this is a bad boy, right? Like this is somebody going against what is society always telling us. And it's kind of far-fetched, right? So think about it, how weird it is that we have people that are flat earthers, right? Obviously flat earthers, they're not right. It's a whole conspiracy or something. But think about it of something like so crazy and so out there that it seems out of the ordinary and that you're going against what society has been telling you your whole life, right? This is what Copernicus was doing, except instead of flat earthers just like spewing this conspiracy, Copernicus is actually saying the truth, right? So obviously sounds familiar, right? Okay, so questioning the church. Ptolemy, kind of referencing back, most experts, they rejected this revolutionary theory, which contradicted both church and teaching and the teachings of Ptolemy, right? In Europe, all scientific knowledge and many religious teachings were based on the arguments developed by classical thinkers. When I say classical thinkers, I'm talking about the Romans and the Greeks, okay? Remember that we talked about the Roman Empire and how important it was? When I say classical, it's referencing back that golden age that we all wish that we could go back to, like we talked about in the Renaissance, the Romans and the Greeks. If Ptolemy's reasoning about the planets was wrong, then people were starting to think, wait, if he's wrong, then what else has the church been teaching me that might be completely wrong as well, right? The whole system of human knowledge that people have been growing up with for years and years and years might be called into question. So, Copernicus, obviously he was not alone, okay? There was another astronomer. His name was Tycho Brahe, all right? I know it looks like it would be sounded out like Brahe, but you gotta be like, what's up, Brahe, right? Tycho Brahe. So he provided evidence to actually support Copernicus. Brahe, you gotta be like, sup, Brahe, right? Sup, Brahe. Brahe set up an astronomical observatory every night. And that observatory, he had like a telescope, and he carefully, actually, my bad, he did not have a telescope, not until Galileo, but he actually observed the sky every single night and accumulated data and data and data and wrote down notes and notes and notes about the movement. And when I say the heavens, the movement of the heavens, I mean the sky, right? The stars, the galaxies, the planets that are out there. He took on so much data in order to prove that Copernicus was right. After he died, his assistant, brilliant German astronomer and a mathematician, Johannes Kepler, used Brahe's data to calculate the orbits of the planets revolving around the sun. So he took a previous scientist's support data and actually supported it using his math. His calculations also supported Copernicus in the heliocentric view. Remember, sun-centered, that's heliocentric. At the same time, however, they showed that each planet does not move in a perfect circle, but instead it actually moves in an ellipse, right? So remember, like, everybody thought like, okay, the Earth is in the middle, everything revolves perfectly around it, like in a perfect circle. But then Copernicus says, no, the sun is in the middle. And then later, Kepler goes it a step further and proves they don't even go in a perfect circle. It goes in an oval, or it goes in like a type of like ellipse, right? So we all know Galileo, right? You might have even heard like some people yelling out the Galileo, Galileo, like the song by Queen or something like that. But Galileo's discoveries, scientists from many different lands built on the work of Copernicus and Kepler in Italy. Remember the Renaissance, right? That started in Italy. In Italy, there's a guy named Galileo Galilei, okay? You gotta say it with an Italian accent, right? It's Galileo Galilei. He used this new technology that he assembled, which is a telescope, okay? So Galileo's discovery, Galileo's big thing was that he was the inventor of the telescope. With this instrument, he became the very first person to see mountains on the moon, which is a huge deal. He observed that the 4 moons of Jupiter moved slowly around the planet exactly the same way that Copernicus said that Earth moves around the sun, right? So Galileo's discoveries totally caused an uproar towards the church, okay? Really big, right? So with that uproar, the church is like, all right, this guy's becoming a problem. He's starting to undermine us. He's starting to go against what we're teaching our people. So what do? Other scholars started to attack him as well because his discoveries were starting to contradict with ancient or classical views about the world. You can't question the world if like it's already, I guess, perfectly in order in the way that they teach it. But he's saying like, hey, listen, this is the truth, right? So Galileo, telescope, okay? He proved even more so Copernicus's theory because of the 4 moons that he saw revolving around Jupiter. The church condemned him about his ideas and then challenged because his ideas basically challenged Christian teachings that the heavens were fixed, unmoving, and perfect. So explaining this a little bit further, the church used to explain and teach people nothing can disrupt the heavens. The heavens are perfectly in order and nothing can disrupt them. So then when Galileo comes up with this idea of like, listen, we rotate, and when we rotate, it's not around us, it's around the sun. I'm proving the point that Copernicus gave, and I have proof here because of my telescope. The church was furious because they're like, stop undermining our authority. Okay? These are actually pictures right here in the background of Galileo's sketching of the moon. Looks pretty legit, right? I'll show you in another slide how it compares. So, in 1633, Galileo was tried before the Inquisition. The Inquisition was like a major group of people that kind of like decided whether you were unlawful or lawful, and he spent the rest of his life under house arrest just because he proved correct what Copernicus said and he had a telescope. Threatened with death unless he withdrew his statements, Galileo agreed. Finally, he said, all right, it's not worth my life, even though that I know that it's true. Galileo agreed to state publicly in court that Earth stood motionless at the center of the universe. So, unfortunately, like threatening your life, it's a big deal. I'd be scared too. I would say whatever people wanted me to say in order to save myself, but he knew the truth. And he was willing to like kind of go up and sort of state that, but then once your life is on the line, you can only do so much, right? So, looking at the sketch, this is Galileo's right here. This is a real picture of the moon. Not bad, right? Like it looks actually pretty accurate and it looks pretty legit. Why were the discoveries of the astronomer like Galileo seen as radical and a threat to church authority? What I want you to do right now is you're going to pause this video in just a second. You're going to answer this question in your notes, and then what I want you to do is you'll raise your hand and I'll come initial that you answered this question, and then you'll move on to part 2, okay? So you can either pause it here or you can end the video, but here's the question that you're answering in your notes. Why were the discoveries of the astronomer like Galileo seen as radical and a threat to church authority? Write about 2 sentences to answer this question. If you're at home or watching this because you were absent in class or whatever, just come and check with me the next day in school, okay? But this is the end of part 1. Go to part 2 for the rest of the lecture. Bye.